I'm just about ready to sew the applique with my machine. I'm using a machine with an adjustable zigzag option, and I have set my zigzag to one width and one length, maybe 1.1 length and 1.1 width. And I've also set my machine to have my needle stop in the down position. My top tension is set to 0, and on my machine the bobbin case has this little wing, and I've threaded my monofilament, which is my thread of choice, right through that wing. So if your machine has that option, that's what that wing is for decorative stitching and the threads for it. So I'm going to pop that back in, and it's about ready. So the thread that I'm using is Sulky Invisible. I'm using clear. You can certainly color match and use a fine polyester, an 80 or 100 weight, or a fine silk, and color match all of your fabrics so that your thread disappears at the edge of your fabric. I'm going to use the monofilament. That way I don't have to change colors as I'm going. I am using the monofilament in my bobbin. My machine is completely fine with it. Some machines aren't. And if you know your machine doesn't do well with monofilament, the first thing I want you to do is try the Sulky. Some monofilaments machines don't like, and they're often brands other than Sulky, and they're made of rayon. This is a poly. I really like this one a lot, but again, it doesn't mean that all machines will like it, but give it a try. If your machine doesn't like the Sulky and the bobbin, use a color like white or something neutral that matches your background, because the bobbin thread shouldn't be coming up at all. So we want that to stay underneath. And I'm using the Schmetz machine embroidery needles in 7511. I've talked a lot about these needles in previous videos, but just as a refresher, we want to use the machine embroidery needles because they are ballpoint, so they will separate the fibers, land the stitch, and then sew without damaging your fibers and threads. They are heat tempered, so they hold up really well to any deflection. They also have a polished eye, so they prevent your threads from shredding and fraying, and they allow your threads to last longer. That could also be a reason that your machine may not like the Sulky. So try these needles. Because of the polished eye, the Sulky will feed through much more smoothly. So I've got everything all threaded and ready to go. Let me pull up that bobbin thread real quick. And I've already set up my stitch length and width. I like to use tweezers in case I can't see that monofilament coming up. And do make sure, okay, it's all ready to go. I'm going to start sewing at the point of one of the petals. Now the back, let me show you what the back is going to end up looking like. So you can see here, the bobbin thread is at the back of the piece. So we want the back to finish up just like that. So let's start at one of the points here. And what we're going for with this stitch is to have the needle go into the background on one side and into the applique on another. And we want it to just go back and forth as we go down and around. We don't want it to take up a lot of width because our goal is that these stitches will kind of tuck under after quilting and washing. So nice small stitch, but not teeny, 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 tiny. Okay, hold those threads in the back so they don't get woven and stitched under. And we're going to go ahead and start just moving down and around. Now, if you follow these lines of the edges of the pieces, and we're kind of going to just keep going around all of the edges, it naturally turns into a continuous piece rather than, or continuous line, rather than sewing one piece at a time. So as I'm sewing, you'll see what I mean. So right here at this intersection, rather than turning at this point and coming back up, I'm going to pivot and sew the edge. I'm going to sew the edge of this piece here and come around and continue doing that. And as I'm going, I'll sew around each of the pieces. And then hopefully I will come back to where I started, right over here. You can see how one stitch lands on and one stitch lands off. Now I'm coming up to a point here, so I'm going to need to pivot. So whether your stitch lands on or off of your applique, if we just want the needle to be at the point. So then I'll pivot and then stitch right there. Then I'm going to pivot again and then keep going. Now each point is going to be a little bit different with regard to how many pivots you might have to take to get past it. We just want to catch the point for sure as you're sewing. Okay, I'm coming up to another intersection. Every once in a while you might need to stop as you're sewing and adjust your block. Alright, now here, this is going to be really tempting to keep sewing up to the point where I started from, right up here. I'm going to go ahead and stitch all of the inside pieces of the 4 center petals. So I'll pivot right there, and this will allow me to come back around and stitch all of the petals continuously. So as I'm going here, I'm coming to this next intersection, and I'm going to continue around this petal up here. In the pattern, I'll include a little diagram of the path I took so that you can follow along. Now this is not speedy, so take your time as you're going around all of the petals. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the next petal next to the red bud and the petal I just stitched. Now, this isn't the only path that you can take for stitching these. If you figure out another way to stitch this continuously, that's fantastic. We will need to come back to sew those red buds though. I haven't figured out a way to do those continuously. Okay, we're coming back to that intersection of 4, and I'm going to continue sewing down and do the inside of this petal here. Alright, you're going to get good at these points. And maybe you can even get it to land back in the stitch like that one did. I love when that happens. Alright, and then just keep moving around. I think one thing I neglected to talk about was the foot that I'm using. You've probably already noticed, and you're probably questioning my judgment on why I am not using a traditional zigzag foot. I feel like the toes on that one are too wide for the stitch width that we're using for the zigzag, so I'm using a narrower foot. Not all machines have this type of a foot. This is my Bernina, and I'm using the 37 foot. It's my favorite for this. The width of this is really nice for doing this width of a zigzag. And it also helps to control the sides of the zigzag so my fabric doesn't kind of poof up in the middle. Another thing I do really highly recommend is just looking at all of the feet that you've got and finding which foot works for the job you need it to. That may mean you're using the one they recommend, and it may mean that you're using one that they may not have considered would be good for the job that you need it to do. So just try them out, see which one works best for you, and I think that gives you more flexibility with the tools that you have. And it's your machine. You can really choose which feet you want to use for which job, and hopefully you'll find something that works really well or even better than what the manufacturer had intended. Okay, we're moving around this next piece here. And do notice how my needle is landing in between the two pieces that are bumped up together. I'm not straddling it and trying to get both pieces with one run of the zigzag. I want them to be stitched independently. What I want you to notice is when you're working with that point, how important it was to have reinforced it with the liquid stitch. When your needle is pushing through 2 or 3 times, and it can push those fibers apart, that liquid stitch will help keep them Now I'm coming up to the intersection where I already did this flower petal, or this leaf, or I already did this leaf. So I'm going to come up to the point right here, and when I get to this point, I'm going to pivot and work my way back around over here. And then this will take me all the way around the outside circle of these center pieces back to this point so that I can finish this side and end up where I started. So here you can see we're going to go around this outside circle now. Okay, we are coming up to the intersection where we're going to pivot back around and do the outside of the leaf that will take us back to the beginning. So right here at this point, I'm going to pivot around so the needle landed on the outside, which when I turn it will bring it to the inside of the next petal. And now we are going right back up to where we started from. Now before I get there, I want to pull this thread, the top one, to the back now before I stitch over it again. It makes it much easier to do it now than later. So I usually will use these little tweezers to help me pull it through. Just give it a little yank. The bobbin thread should pull the top thread to the back a little bit. And if you can't see it with your eyeballs, a little pair of tweezers or a straight pin or something can help pull it through. Now you'll notice, or I hope you did, I did not backstitch there, and the reason I did not backstitch at the beginning is I wanted to be able to pull that thread back more easily, and if I had backstitched, it would have been harder to get that top thread back. So my top thread is now at the back, and when I stitch down to the end, I'm going to lock my stitch there. And when I lock my stitch over where I started, then it will lock in that starting stitch as well. I'm going to pivot a little bit right at this point. And to lock your stitch, you can do one of two things. You can back stitch, or you can drop your feed dogs and keep it in zigzag, and it'll just go right back and forth. So that's what I just did. I dropped my feed dogs and then just did a back and forth stitch, and that'll lock it in place. Pull up that bobbin thread and top thread, and now instead of cutting it, I'm going to give myself some slack and jump stitch to my little flower buds. So I'm going to jump stitch and sew all the little flower buds around the piece. Now this doesn't have a place where I come back to as a stop and a start. So I'm going to lock my stitch at the beginning and the end with each one of these. So I'm going to drop my feed dogs. You can backstitch if you prefer. And now I'm going to just move on to the point and pivot. And then lock stitch. Oh, that went into the green, but that's okay. It'll hide there. I want it to stay in the red, but it just hopped into the green. Now I'm going to jump stitch again. This just helps us control our ends of our threads a little bit more easily as we're starting. Okay, I'm going to start here, lock my stitch, and then move around. And I'm going to repeat this for all four. See, that one worked better. That was in the red. Okay, move around. I'm going to readjust if you need to, or to get it to start where you want it to. Lock my stitch and move around. And the last one. Alright. Give yourself some slack. Cut that top thread about 1/2 inch or so. And then on the back, before I clip it, I'm going to pull that top thread to the back. At that time, it just came with my fingernails. No problem. You can see it there. And then cut this one about 1 inch or so. And now I'm going to go around each of the petals at the starts and stops and clip the thread just like I did. The top one I'll clip about 1/2 inch or so, and then on the back I'll pull it to the back and then clip that back one about an inch. That way the threads don't find their way back to the front of your block, and they'll just bury themselves in your batting. So that'll be the last thing we do. Let me do one more to show you. So clip this, and then on the back side I'm going to pull that bobbin thread. You can use your fingernails or tweezers. And then it will just pull right to the back, so you can see that there. See? Both threads are there. And we'll just continue all around, and then you'll have a nice finished top with no thread ends at the front of your block. Well, our block is all finished. If you need to, go ahead and give your block a little light pressing. All of that work at the machine can cause a few wrinkles here and there. You can also lightly starch it, very lightly, just to get some of these wrinkles out, or give it a little steam. Not much though, because remember there's foundation in these with glue. We don't want to kind of soften it up too much. Steaming can actually help a little bit in softening it, but you know, be very light with the steam. And then on the back, look how nice it looks with our zigzag stitches all buried. I pulled all of those ends of the threads to the back, clipped them all to about 1 inch, 1/2 inch to 1 inch, so they'll just bury themselves into the batting after it's all quilted. And it just looks really, really great. I hope yours does too. I hope that you've enjoyed this block and gave applique a try. It is really one of my favorites techniques, and I don't expect everybody to love it as much as I do, but I sure hope that you'll give it a try and find a way to use it in your work. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and it's been my honor and privilege to be a part of it with you. Please join us over on the Facebook group if you have any questions and have already purchased the pattern. Again, you can always join the Stellar Stars Block of the Month and receive all of the previous blocks for the months that have gone by, and catch up as you can. This is a project to work on in the time that works best for you. You take at your pace and as you need to, and I'm always here for you. Please leave a comment if you have any questions or just want to say hi, and I appreciate you so much. And I will see you next month.